Hey guys, tonight we are not going to talk about famous admirals or dramatic naval battles. Instead, we're going to step aboard a creaking, slightly damp Victorian ocean liner, or perhaps a humble cargo vessel, somewhere around the 1880s, and we're going to search for the smallest, fuzziest, and perhaps the most vital member of the entire crew, the ship cat. Picture this scene. You are standing on the sloshing deck. The air is thick with the scent of coal, smoke, brine, and something vaguely metallic. The massive steam engine thrums a deep, repetitive lullaby beneath your feet. A perfect sound for sleep, honestly. You look up at the towering masts, realizing just how small you are in the face of the vast, cold Atlantic. The polished brass gleams. The ropes creak a rhythm. And somewhere, just out of sight, a tiny shadow darts along the railing. That shadow is your protagonist tonight. It's the four-legged, whiskered guardian who holds the entire ship together, preventing it from being entirely overrun by a scuttling, teeth-gnashing menace. You probably won't survive this journey without a little discomfort. It was the Victorian age, after all, where sanitary was mostly a hopeful suggestion, and the only reliable form of heating was layering 6 blankets in your entire wardrobe. But tonight, you don't have to worry about scurvy or seasickness. You only have to focus on the gentle details of life at sea, seen through the golden, slightly sleepy eyes of a cat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And now, please feel free to let me know where in the world you're settling in from and what time it is for you. Maybe someone is drifting off in Tokyo, while another is just waking up near London. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the slight rhythmic roll of the ship, a movement that would send most modern stomachs reeling, but which quickly becomes the most monotonous, predictable metronome for your relaxation. We are on the ocean, heading, well, the Victorians were always heading somewhere, usually to expand their empire, transport goods, or maybe just deliver a rather stern-looking governor-general to a humid new post. The ship, whether it's a magnificent clipper ship or a newly engineered steamship, is essentially a giant wooden or iron pantry floating on water. And where there is a pantry, there are always guests who were definitely not invited. We're talking about the rats and mice, of course. For the Victorian sailor or passenger, these vermin were not just a nuisance, they were an existential threat. They chewed through ropes and essential canvas, leading to structural failures. They gnawed on wires, sometimes causing fires. Most importantly, they ate the precious, carefully rationed food stores and spread diseases with terrifying efficiency. Think of the ship's hold as a vast, dark, floating city for rodents, and you realize that every single voyage was a constant war. This is where our hero, the ship cat, becomes absolutely indispensable. You see a crewman in a dark blue jacket and a slightly greasy cap walking past your spot near the main hatch. He is carrying a small, dented tin bowl. He stops and gently nudges the bowl toward a shadowed corner. A sleek, mottled tabby, let's call her Mittens, because apparently Victorians weren't always incredibly creative, emerges from the darkness, stretches with a luxurious yawn that shows off surprisingly sharp little teeth, and begins to lap up whatever lukewarm, slightly fishy broth the sailor has provided. This isn't just a pet enjoying a snack. This is a highly valued, essential, and at times officially salaried member of the crew, earning her keep. It's one of those gentle foundational facts of maritime history. Most large vessels, military or commercial, officially budgeted for the care and feeding of cats, and sometimes even dogs or ferrets, specifically for rodent control. This isn't a quirky, fringe tidbit about some eccentric captain. This was mainstream, common practice, almost a mandatory operating procedure. In an age before chemical rodenticides were safe or effective aboard a ship, the natural predator was the only reliable answer. Think of Mittens as a tiny, purring, biological weapon, a very efficient, low-maintenance one at that. You might be wondering, but wait, didn't the Victorians love formality? Did the cat have a job title? Absolutely they did. These working felines were often referred to simply as the ship's cat, or perhaps the mouser in official records, but sometimes they were listed on the ship's books as supernumerary, an official title meaning they were extra personnel not counted in the main complement, yet still necessary. Imagine having a job where your primary qualification is just being adorable and occasionally terrorizing mice. That sounds like a pretty good deal, doesn't it? If the cat was exceptionally successful, or maybe just very charming, they might even get an official, documented salary. Though this salary usually translated into the best scraps from the cook's galley, a dry spot to sleep near the warmth of the engine room, and perhaps an extra stroke from the captain, the ultimate Victorian bonus. Now, as you watch Mittens lick her paw with slow, deliberate focus, you realize that the presence of the cat wasn't just practical, it was deeply psychological. Life aboard a ship was monotonous, dangerous, and often brutally lonely. The presence of a small, warm, predictable creature was an immense boost to morale. It offered a quiet, non-judgmental companionship that the gruffest sailor desperately craved. It was a tiny, fuzzy anchor to the world they left behind, a reminder of cozy hearths and dry land. You can almost hear the soft purr from Mittens as she curls up against a coil of rope. This deep rumble is one of the quietest, most soothing sounds on the entire ship, cutting through the loud, ambient noises of the voyage. This brings us to a slightly quirky and perhaps overlooked tidbit. Cats were often seen as living barometers by the sailors. It wasn't just superstition either. Sailors, ever attuned to subtle changes in their environment, believed that if a cat started playing vigorously or appeared unsettled, it signaled an upcoming storm or rough weather. It's possible this was due to cats' heightened sensitivity to changes in atmospheric pressure long before humans could detect it easily with primitive instruments. This ability elevated the cat from pest controller to a semi-official weather forecaster, giving the crew a slight edge in preparing for a squall. It's a lovely little piece of forgotten occupational history. Historians still argue whether the cat's primary contribution was emotional support versus pure rodent control. Some documents emphasize the tonnage of grain saved from rats, while others spend pages detailing the therapeutic effect of a cat sleeping on the bridge during a stressful watch. It's hard to quantify exactly how much value was placed on the psychological side, but given how long and dangerous these voyages were, I think it's fair to assume that a purring cat was probably worth more than its weight in gold, or at least worth its weight in slightly less moldy biscuits. The Victorians were surprisingly sentimental about their pets, even the working ones. As the ship continues its slow, rocking motion, you watch the sailor return to retrieve the empty tin bowl. He gives Mittens a silent, respectful nod. You feel the ship lurch gently again, the engine's rhythmic pulse pushing you further into the quiet of the night. We have established the cat's role, but in the next section, we'll dive deeper into the official paperwork, the surprisingly detailed vermin-catching contracts that governed the feline's life at sea. But for now, just relax into the rhythmic creak of the old wooden timbers and the soft, steady hum of the steam engine below.
The rhythmic, rocking motion continues, pulling you deeper into the ship's interior. You can almost smell the musty, metallic tang of the hold, overlaid with a faint whiff of salt air, and perhaps a slight, earthy scent from the damp ropes. Remember Mittens, the tabby we saw earlier? We established her job description was purring, biological weapon. But let's get into the slightly boring, yet wonderfully specific logistics of her employment. This is where the vermin-catching contract comes into play. You see, the Victorians documented everything. If it moved, it needed a policy. If it breathed, it needed paperwork. And if it was a cat saving their biscuits from rats, it certainly needed its own entry in the ship's ledger. While an official written contract signed with a tiny paw-printed seal didn't exist, thankfully, that would be a nightmare for maritime lawyers, the cat's existence was formally acknowledged, often listed directly alongside the quartermaster and the cook. The cat wasn't just a stray that wandered aboard. It was a procured piece of essential marine equipment. This is a mainstream historical fact. Many shipping companies, particularly those running large liners or essential naval support ships, would allocate a specific, small-budget line item for mouser provisions. This wasn't salary in cash. A cat isn't great at investing in the stock market, though I imagine they'd make a killing in tuna futures. But it was a guarantee of care. The contract, though unspoken, was simple. Pest control in exchange for board, lodging, and the best scraps. The crew treated this contract with surprising seriousness. If a cat was lazy, or worse, scared of rats, it was deemed a failure of equipment and might be replaced at the next port of call. However, a cat that performed its duty was revered. They were given access to areas strictly forbidden to junior sailors, such as the captain's personal quarters or the protected navigation bridge. This was the cat's executive lounge, earned through sheer predatory effectiveness. You hear the faint, high-pitched squeak of a rat echoing from the walls, quickly cut short by a low thump. It's a reminder of the quiet, constant work being done. This brings up a delightful, quirky tidbit. Sometimes ship cats were paid in an official, recorded way, not with shillings, but with a milk ration. On naval vessels where provisions were meticulously logged, the quantity of fresh milk allotted to the ship's cat would sometimes be noted in the logbook under miscellaneous stores. A successful, high-ranking mouser could sometimes receive more daily fresh milk than a junior midshipman who was stuck drinking the highly questionable tinned variety. Imagine the quiet, jealous resentment brewing in the lower ranks. That fluffy brute gets the fresh dairy, and I get this metallic sludge. It's a very Victorian workplace drama, played out entirely over a tin of condensed milk. The cat's duties also went beyond simple hunting. They provided a crucial service by creating a scent boundary. Rats are intelligent, cautious creatures. The constant, unmistakable smell of a feline predator permeating the cargo hold was often enough to deter them from boarding at the dock in the first place, or at least drive them into the less valuable areas of the ship. So Mittens was essentially a floating, four-legged piece of biological hazard signage. Warning: apex predator present. The crew, knowing the cat was keeping their voyage safe and their food clean, were fiercely protective. Any sailor caught mistreating the ship's cat could face surprisingly harsh punishment, sometimes a public reprimand or even forfeiture of shore leave. This wasn't animal cruelty law. This was protecting a vital, unarmed member of the supply chain. As you lean against the wall, trying to find a comfortable spot, a tough task on a ship that seems designed solely for discomfort, you might be wondering about the cat's rank. Was it an officer? A humble deckhand? Historians still argue whether the cat held an unofficial officer status, particularly when residing in the captain's cabin, where only officers were usually permitted. While they never wore little tiny uniforms, thankfully, the sarcasm would be overwhelming, the ship's cat often ate before the junior ratings, slept in the warmest spots, and was treated with the deference usually reserved for those with gold braid on their hats. They were perhaps the most beloved and least accountable member of the entire hierarchy. They were the ultimate Victorian contradiction: strictly professional vermin controller, utterly pampered pet. The rhythmic creak of the hull and the deep hum of the machinery are becoming less noticeable now, merging into a single, cohesive sound environment.
the movement of the ship seems gentler, almost a cradle-like sway. As the shadows lengthen, you spot Mittens again. She has finished her patrol, satisfied her contractual obligation for the moment, and is now performing a critical secondary function: grooming. She's meticulous, focused, and completely unconcerned with the fact that she is floating in a wooden box across a vast, unforgiving ocean. She has a warm spot and a full belly, and that's all that matters to a true professional. We've established the cat's pay structure. Next, we will explore the deeper, mystical side of their presence, the fascinating world of maritime superstitions, and the power a simple feline held over the nervous Victorian sailor. But for now, just breathe in that subtle, comforting smell of old timber and salt. The ship continues its slow, hypnotic journey, and you are starting to find your sea legs, leaning into the rhythm instead of fighting it. You've seen Mittens, the tabby, fulfill her professional obligations, diligently ridding the cargo hold of the nasty little stowaways. But now, as the light fades outside the narrow porthole and the deeper colors of the ocean night begin to press against the hull, we move from the ledger book to the realm of folklore and deep, nervous superstition. For the Victorian sailor, a person whose entire life was governed by things they couldn't control, the wind, the waves, the whims of the captain, every tiny detail held a potential omen. And no creature on board was more heavily burdened with mystical significance than the cat. The cat wasn't just equipment. It was a living conduit to the elemental forces of the sea itself. You walk past the galley, where the cook is humming a tune that is slightly off-key, and you notice a small makeshift bed tucked away, constructed from a folded blanket and a pillow, liberated, probably illicitly, from a passenger's berth. Curled up there, in the warmest corner near the stove, is a different cat. This one completely black. On land, in Britain, a black cat crossing your path was usually a sign of imminent bad luck, a minor disaster waiting to happen. But at sea, the entire cosmic balance flipped. This is a mainstream historical fact of maritime culture. A black cat was considered the best and most potent form of good luck a ship could carry. They were thought to protect the vessel from rough weather, ensure safe passage, and even possess the power to guide the ship home through fog and storm. The logic was simple, if completely unscientific. A black cat could successfully absorb the ship's bad luck, shielding the vessel and its crew from the wicked intentions of the ocean spirits. The irony is delicious. These sailors would refuse to step under a ladder or light 3 cigarettes with 1 match, yet they would stake their lives on a fluffy, tiny animal being a magical bad luck sponge. You stand there for a moment, admiring the cat's serene confidence, the way it seems entirely unbothered by the rhythmic creaking and groaning of the vessel that surrounds it. This tiny creature holds the power of life and death simply by existing and being black. If that's not peak Victorian romanticism mixed with paranoia, I don't know what is. But the cat's power was a double-edged sword. You had to treat it right. You had to respect it. And most importantly, you could never talk about it doing things. The worst thing you could ever do was mention the cat falling overboard, even as a joke, because if you spoke the words, you risked tempting fate, and the sea gods, who were apparently very sensitive to ship gossip, would surely make it happen. You can almost hear the captain's low, stern voice if a junior sailor even whispered the word drowned near the cat. Son, that cat's worth more than your next 3 years of pay.
Keep your morbid little thoughts to yourself." This reverence for the cat also extended to its body language, a quirky and slightly fringed tidbit that often appears in older sailors' journals. If the ship's cat suddenly sneezed, it was universally interpreted as an omen of heavy, imminent rain. Now, we know cats sneeze for all sorts of normal, non-prophetic reasons. Dust, a hairball, or maybe they just silently judged the cook's biscuits and were physically revolted. But for the Victorian mariner, a Gesundheit was a formal weather report. A quick, watery achoo meant the deck needed to be battened down, ropes needed checking, and everyone was about to get very, very wet. It's a charming image, really. A 100-ton sailing vessel being guided by the state of its cat's sinuses. It's certainly a lower-tech solution than radar, but probably equally as effective given the state of 19th-century naval meteorology. A joke, of course, but you can imagine the frustration of getting soaking wet only for the cat to look at you like, "My bad, it was just the dust." The most serious superstition, and one that could cause the entire crew to stop what they were doing and watch nervously, revolved around the cat's tail. Sailors believed that a cat's tail controlled the wind. If the cat was happy and its tail was gently swaying, it meant good sailing weather. If the cat was agitated and switched its tail back and forth violently, it was believed that the cat was actively calling up a storm, a gale, or perhaps even a full-blown hurricane, usually in a fit of pique over the quality of the canned herring. Some sailors even had a peculiar practice of gently, or perhaps not so gently, depending on the captain, tying a knot in the cat's tail to knot up the strong winds and ensure the ship only experienced gentle breezes. Poor Mittens. Imagine getting a raise only to have your most crucial piece of meteorological equipment constrained by a piece of twine. But the cat was a powerful creature. You'd often find that some crews would refuse to even allow a cat to be named by a passenger, insisting that only a sailor who truly understood the sea could give it a proper nautical name, like bosun, or maybe just mouser. This disparity in treatment leads us right to an area of genuine historical ambiguity. Historians still argue whether the cat's power on board was truly derived from superstition or simply from the intense psychological need for emotional relief. Was the black cat a mystical shield against bad luck? Or was it just the one creature the sailors felt safe being openly affectionate with, thus releasing pent-up stress? You could argue that the ritualistic feeding and care provided a sense of control and normalcy in an otherwise chaotic, often terrifying environment. If they could keep the cat happy, maybe they could keep the sea happy. It's a gentle, comforting thought, isn't it, that a simple purr could hold the storm at bay. You feel a soft, vibrating presence suddenly jump onto your lap. It's Mittens again. She doesn't care about your historical musings or your existential contemplation of the vast ocean. She just wants a warm spot and the quiet ear scratch. Her fur is surprisingly dense, and her purr is immediately deep and resonant, a tiny biological engine of calm that cuts through the creaks and groans of the ship that surrounds it. This tiny creature holds the power of life and death simply by existing and being black. If that's not peak Victorian romanticism mixed with paranoia, I don't know what is. But the cat's power was a double-edged sword. You had to treat it right. You had to respect it. And most importantly, you could never talk about it doing things. The worst thing you could ever do was mention the cat falling overboard, even as a joke, because if you spoke the words, you risked tempting fate, and the sea gods, who were apparently very sensitive to ship gossip, would surely make it happen. You can almost hear the captain's low, stern voice if a junior sailor even whispered the word drowned near the cat. Son, that cat's worth more than your next 3 years of pay. Keep your morbid little thoughts to yourself. This reverence for the cat also extended to its body language, a quirky and slightly fringed tidbit that often appears in older sailors' journals. If the ship's cat suddenly sneezed, it was universally interpreted as an omen of heavy, imminent rain. Now, we know cats sneeze for all sorts of normal, non-prophetic reasons. Dust, a hairball, or maybe they just silently judged the cook's biscuits and were physically revolted. But for the Victorian mariner, a gesundheit was a formal weather report. A quick, watery achoo meant the deck needed to be battened down, ropes needed checking, and everyone was about to get very, very wet. It's a charming image, really. A 100-ton sailing vessel being guided by the state of its cat's sinuses. It's certainly a lower-tech solution than radar, but probably equally as effective given the state of 19th-century naval meteorology. A joke, of course, but you can imagine the frustration of getting soaking wet only for the cat to look at you like, "My bad, it was just the dust." The most serious superstition, and one that could cause the entire crew to stop what they were doing and watch nervously, revolved around the cat's tail. Sailors believed that a cat's tail controlled the wind. If the cat was happy and its tail
was gently swaying, it meant good sailing weather. If the cat was agitated and switched its tail back and forth violently, it was believed that the cat was actively calling up a storm, a gale, or perhaps even a full-blown hurricane, usually in a fit of pique over the quality of the canned herring. Some sailors even had a peculiar practice of gently, or perhaps not so gently depending on the captain, tying a knot in the cat's tail to knot up the strong winds and ensure the ship only experienced gentle breezes. Poor Mittens. Imagine getting a raise only to have your most crucial piece of meteorological equipment constrained by a piece of twine. But the cat was a powerful creature. You'd often find that some crews would refuse to even allow a cat to be named by a passenger, insisting that only a sailor who truly understood the sea could give it a proper nautical name like bosun, or maybe just mouser. This disparity in treatment leads us right to an area of genuine historical ambiguity. Historians still argue whether the cat's power on board was truly derived from superstition or simply from the intense psychological need for emotional relief. Was the black cat a mystical shield against bad luck, or was it just the one creature the sailors felt safe being openly affectionate with, thus releasing pent-up stress? You could argue that the ritualistic feeding and care provided a sense of control and normalcy in an otherwise chaotic, often terrifying environment. If they could keep the cat happy, maybe they could keep the sea happy. It's a gentle, comforting thought, isn't it, that a simple purr could hold the storm at bay. You feel a soft, vibrating presence suddenly jump onto your lap. It's Mittens again. She doesn't care about your historical musings or your existential contemplation of the vast ocean. She just wants a warm spot and a quiet ear scratch. Her fur is surprisingly dense, and her purr is immediately deep and resonant, a tiny biological engine of calm that cuts through the creaks and groans of the ship. This is the cat's final, unwritten, and perhaps most valuable role, providing an island of pure, unadulterated comfort on a cold, indifferent sea. The Victorian voyage could last weeks, even months. You were isolated, working difficult, often brutal shifts, eating monotonous food, and constantly facing danger. And then there's Mittens, a small, warm fact of nature that remains unchanged. She is a purring paradox, a magical creature that also happens to be wonderfully, predictably real. The soft pads of her paws against your leg are a reminder that, for all the talk of black magic and weather prediction, the simplest joy often came down to a soft, gentle connection. The rhythm of the ship continues, the gentle sway a constant reminder that you are moving, drifting, but not entirely alone. We've explored the superstitions, but the question remains: how did this sacred yet professional little cat actually fit into the human hierarchy of the ship? Who got to pet the cat? Who was stuck cleaning up after it? We'll explore the subtle but complex social status of the ship cat in the next section, delving into the odd relationships between officers, crew, and the pampered, four-legged superstar.
Mittens is still settled comfortably on your lap, her soft weight reassuring against the perpetual rocking motion of the ship. We've established her as a professional mouser and a miniature nautical deity. Now, let's explore a fascinating social dimension, the subtle but complex hierarchy surrounding the ship cat. This wasn't just a pet. The cat was a living barometer of social status on the vessel, navigating the strict divisions between the officers, the crew, and the paying passengers. You must remember, the Victorian ship was essentially a rigid floating microcosm of society. The captain was a demigod, the first mates were respected nobility, the engineers were skilled working class, and the junior sailors, or ratings, were near the bottom. The cat, however, somehow floated above this rigid structure, enjoying privileges denied to nearly everyone else. This is a mainstream historical fact. The ship's cat often dictated social space. A cat was one of the few living things that could freely wander from the grimy, oil-smelling engine room all the way up to the polished teak and brass of the bridge or the captain's private curtained quarters. A sailor who tried that would be instantly disciplined, but for the cat, it was a perfectly acceptable part of their daily patrol. The cat's ability to move between these sacred boundaries made it a shared responsibility, but also a source of subtle competition. Who got to feed the cat? Who got the highly coveted honor of the cat choosing their lap for a nap? These were not trivial questions. If the captain's cat chose to nap in the bunk of a junior sailor, that sailor instantly gained a tiny, almost invisible sliver of status. It was a silent, fluffy endorsement from the highest authority on the ship. The cat was an arbiter of favor. Now, picture a particularly stuffy first-class passenger, perhaps a wealthy lady who paid extra for a lavish stateroom, strutting onto the deck. She tries to coax Mittens onto her expensive rustling silk lap with a tiny piece of stale cake. Mittens takes one look at the cake, gives a theatrical sniff of disdain, and then, in a majestic display of feline apathy, chooses to curl up instead on the worn, rough knee of the scruffy old boatswain who is mending a rope nearby. That, my friend, is a quirky fringe tidbit that happened countless times, and it was a quiet, humorous moment of cosmic correction where the cat, the ultimate working-class hero, rebuffed the pampered aristocracy in favor of genuine nautical skill. The boatswain would feel a surge of quiet internal triumph. The wealthy lady would feel a tiny, satisfying sting of rejection. The cat wasn't just a physical presence, it was a conversational currency. Sailors, typically men of few words, would use the cat as a proxy for social interaction. "Did you see what the old mouser did to that rat last night?" Or, "The captain's cat looks like he could use a bit of that smoked fish I snagged." Talking about the cat was a safe, non-threatening way for the junior ratings to converse with the senior officers without formally addressing rank.
This leads us to a fascinating point that historians still argue whether the cat was treated as a substitute for human family or merely a convenient projection of authority. On long voyages, sailors went months without seeing their wives, children, or land-based pets. Was the fierce protection and pampering of the ship cat a genuine expression of affection for an animal? Or was it a necessary psychological displacement of their familial needs onto the one safe, soft creature on board? The love was real, but the reason for the intensity of the love remains a delightful scholarly debate. Regardless of the reason, the result was the same. The cat was fiercely loved and protected. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb Mittens. You realize that if you were a sailor on the ship, you would be utterly attuned to her well-being. If she was sick, the whole ship would know. If she disappeared for a few hours, a quiet, unofficial search party would begin. Losing the cat wasn't just losing a pest controller. It was potentially inviting bad luck, losing morale, and losing the one creature that everyone, from the most junior steward to the sternest captain, could agree on. She was the one unifying, purring factor in an otherwise rigidly divided workplace. The gentle thrum of the engine is starting to become a hypnotic drone now, the kind of sound that smooths out all your sharp edges and makes your eyelids feel heavy. You watch the flickering lamplight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls of the corridor. The ship cat in this environment was a tiny, warm hearth that everyone gathered around, metaphorically speaking. But this privileged status did come with certain expectations. If Mittens was found shirking her duties, say, sleeping soundly next to a pile of uneaten biscuit crumbs while a rat brazenly scurried past her nose, she would often receive a quiet, disappointed talking to from the crew, sometimes even a mild exile from the warmer spots. It was a gentle, human way of enforcing that unspoken contract we discussed earlier. Come on, Mittens, you've got a job to do. Get to it, old girl. In the next section, we'll dive into the logistical coziness, how the ship actually handled the day-to-day housing and feeding of these honored guests. Where did the cat actually sleep when the weather turned foul? How did they manage to get fresh food on a 3-month voyage? We'll leave the social structure for the slightly more boring, yet essential details of their comfort. But for now, just appreciate the small, warm presence resting on your knee, holding the very hierarchy of the ship in suspended animation.
Mittens gives a small, contented stretch, shifting her weight slightly on your lap. A gentle reminder that she is here, warm, and decidedly in charge of the sleeping arrangements. We've talked about her job and her magical influence, but now we're sinking into the practical, cozy side of the story. Kitty cabin assignments and the logistics of keeping a feline happy on a months-long voyage across vast, salty nothingness. This is where the ship's cook and the chief engineer truly shine, working together to maintain peak feline comfort. You might assume that a working animal would just sleep wherever, perhaps curled up on a cold deck or tucked into a dusty corner of the cargo hold. But remember the cat's elevated status. It was highly valued, and the crew made sure its lodging reflected that. The primary logistical hurdle was simple: dry, warm, and quiet. This leads to a mainstream historical fact. The warmest and often safest spot on any Victorian steamship was near the engine room or the galley. The residual heat from the boilers and stoves was a precious commodity, especially in the cold North Atlantic or during monsoon season. Cats were often given exclusive access to a small, protected nook close to the steam pipes or the furnace, a place where junior ratings could only dream of resting. Think of it as a permanent, first-class heated suite, complete with ambient, gentle mechanical sounds perfect for deep sleep. You walk toward the back of the ship, past the churning paddle wheel or the deep thrum of the screw propeller, and you feel the surge of heat. Tucked into a corner, on a pile of perfectly clean, carefully folded Hessian sacks, is a small feline enjoying a deep, rhythmic slumber.
This specific arrangement was often formalized by the crew. They would rotate the best blankets and softest canvas to ensure the cat's bedding was always fresh. The chief engineer was usually the one charged with this duty, ensuring the comfort of his most temperature-sensitive and most important coworker. But the biggest challenge wasn't lodging. It was food. On a voyage lasting 3 months, fresh food for humans was a struggle, relying on salted meats, hard biscuits, and the occasional lemon to stave off scurvy. So how did they feed their feline royalty? This is where a quirky and delightful tidbit emerges. Ship cats often had a unique, officially sanctioned, and highly fluctuating diet based on the cook's disposition and the ship's recent catches. While the official provision was often a small daily ration of biscuit crumbs mixed with water, which sounds absolutely dreadful even for a cat. In reality, the cook was often tasked with reserving the best parts of the fish caught by the crew or the freshest scraps from the captain's table specifically for the Mauser. The cat was an effective motivator for the fishing crew. Catch something good, and the cat eats well, which means the cat is happy, which means the voyage goes smoothly. If a lucky sailor caught a fine cod or a particularly plump mackerel, the best fillet often went to the cat first. It was a bizarre yet perfectly logical food chain where the lowliest creature received the highest quality protein. Imagine the gentle sarcasm here. The crew survives on hardtack that could break teeth, but Mittens is enjoying a gourmet, freshly caught, flash-fried by the engine room's heat probably, fish dinner. You can almost hear a grumpy sailor mutter, "That cat's living better than my governor back home." The logistical arrangements extended even to hygiene, although the Victorians were somewhat limited in their approach. Ship cats, being exceptionally clean animals, handled their own business, often finding a discreet spot in the hold to create a temporary litter box out of coal dust or dry sand used for ballast. This too was quietly supported by the crew, who understood that a happy cat was a clean cat, and a clean cat meant fewer smells in the cramped quarters. This intense focus on the cat's well-being raises a final interesting point that historians still argue whether the preferential treatment of the ship cat was rooted in practicality, vermin control, or was an early subconscious acknowledgement of animal welfare. Was the crew's dedication to the cat's comfort a purely professional endeavor designed to maximize rodent-killing efficiency? Or did it represent a genuine emotional shift towards viewing animals not just as tools, but as companions deserving of comfort and care? Perhaps, like most things at sea, it was a perfectly balanced mixture of both. The efficiency of the ship depended entirely on the morale of the crew, and the morale of the crew depended entirely on the gentle, purring presence of a well-fed, warm cat. Mittens is starting to wake up now, stretching again. She gives a small, nearly silent yawn, revealing her tiny pink tongue. She seems to understand that her work is never truly done, but for now, the gentle swaying of the ship, the steady warmth of the engines, and the full satisfaction of her belly is enough. We have reached our final port of call for the night. The stories of these ship cats, from their official salary in fresh milk to their role as tiny, furry weather gods, offer a unique, gentle lens through which to view the vast, harsh world of Victorian maritime life. The details are soothing, the humor is gentle, and the simple truth remains. Sometimes, the most important crew member is the one who purrs the loudest. The sound of the ship is fading now. The deep, heavy thrum of the engine is softening, turning into a low, comforting vibration. The creaking of the timbers is slowing, becoming less like a noise and more like a gentle, hypnotic lullaby. Close your eyes. Feel the soft, slow, rhythmic motion of the imaginary ship beneath you. Let the gentle roll of the ocean smooth out any sharp edges or worries you carried into tonight. The air is cool and calm, and somewhere nearby, a small black cat is purring softly, ensuring safe passage and calm seas. You are safe. You are warm. There is nothing left to do now but listen to the quiet, steady breath of the ship as it sails onward through the velvet night. Let your own breath fall into that same slow, deep, relaxing pattern. The voyage is over, and it's time to rest.